She had driven this road 1,000 times before, the same cracked pavement, the same flickering streetlights, the same quiet stretch of highway that faded into darkness after sunset. Nothing about this night felt different. Until the flashing red and blue lights flooded her rearview mirror. In seconds, the calm turned into fear. A simple traffic stop became something heavier, darker, charged with an invisible tension that tightened around her throat. Every movement she made felt watched. Every breath felt judged. The world outside her window suddenly felt hostile, filled with unspoken accusation and quiet contempt. She had done nothing wrong. No crime, no reason to be treated like a threat, but on this road, in this moment, her skin color was enough to change everything. What that officer didn't know, what he couldn't see from outside the car, was the man sitting silently just a few feet away, and the power he held to expose a truth that would shatter everything. And when the realization finally hit him, it was already too late. Was this just another traffic stop? Or the moment his career would end forever? Her name was Aaliyah Monroe, and that night had begun like any other. A long shift at the hospital had drained the last of her energy, and the soft hum of the road beneath her tires was the only sound she wanted to hear as she made her way home. The city around her was settling into silence, storefronts dark, windows dim, life slowing behind closed doors. She welcomed the quiet. It gave her space to breathe. In the passenger seat beside her, her husband sat calmly, his presence steady, grounded. He had insisted on driving with her after hearing about the string of aggressive stops in the neighborhood, reports whispered about in waiting rooms and shared in tired conversations. She had brushed off the concern, never wanting to live in fear. Still, she had agreed, not knowing how much that simple decision would matter. The flashing lights had changed everything. Now she sat still, hands resting carefully on the steering wheel, heart beating slower than expected, as if her body had already learned how to survive moments like this. She knew this routine too well. Lower the window, keep your hands visible, move slowly, don't argue, don't question. These rules had never been written, yet they had been passed down for generations, silently carried in the blood of people like her. Outside the car, the world felt sharp and dangerous. The air was heavy, filled with judgment before a single word had been spoken. The kind of silent tension that made even the smallest movement feel like a risk. Her husband watched everything without reaction. His face gave nothing away. He wasn't there as a title or as a symbol, just a man observing a moment that should have been routine, but was anything but. He had seen traffic stops before. He had read the reports, signed the papers, listened to the excuses. But he had never witnessed one from this side of the glass. And from this angle, it looked far uglier. Aaliyah felt it, the shift from procedure to prejudice, from caution to something colder. Whatever was about to happen had little to do with traffic laws or safety. It was something deeper, more intentional. And as the seconds stretched on, the situation began to tighten like a knot that refused to loosen. What had started as a simple drive home was quietly transforming into a test of dignity, restraint, and power. And the true conflict was only just beginning. The officer's presence drew closer to the car, his shadow stretching long across the hood as the flashing lights continued their silent, rhythmic warning to the empty road. The night air felt colder now, even through the cracked window. Aaliyah kept her gaze forward, her hands still where they were, fingers lightly gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only stable thing left in the world. Time began to move in slow, uncomfortable frames. The kind where every second stretched, thick with anticipation. She could feel eyes on her, not just from the officer beside the car, but from an unseen place, an old, familiar space where suspicion lived. It was the same feeling she had carried with her since childhood, the quiet awareness that in certain spaces, In certain moments, she was seen not as a person, but as a possibility, a threat, a question that needed answering. The officer circled once around the car, scanning the interior with a sharp, practiced motion. His gaze lingered on the dashboard, the back seat, the trunk, searching for something undefined. Not evidence, not a weapon, not a reason, just something that would justify the tension that had already filled this moment. Alia felt the weight of that stare. It wasn't professional. It wasn't routine. It was personal. Inside, her mind raced through everything she had been taught. Don't react. Don't show emotion. Don't give them a reason. Even silence could be dangerous. Even stillness could be misunderstood. The rules were invisible but absolute. Beside her, her husband remained still, his posture relaxed, his eyes quietly tracking every movement outside. He noticed the lingering glances, the unnecessary steps, the way the officer's hand hovered just a little too close to his belt. These were details most people would miss. But he had trained his entire career to read behavior. And what he was seeing now wasn't protocol. It was intimidation wrapped in authority. The air grew heavier. The officer returned to her window, but made no immediate move to explain the stop. There was no urgency, no clear purpose. Just a dragging discomfort, as if waiting for her to break the silence first, to apologize for a crime that did not exist, to fold under a pressure only she could feel. The flicker of control was deliberate. Alia stared ahead, her chest rising and falling slowly. She refused to give him what he wanted: fear, anger, reaction. She had learned long ago that dignity was its own kind of shield, even when the world tried to crack it, but the moment was beginning to draw attention. Cars slowed in the distance before moving past. A figure stepped onto a nearby porch, pausing to look down the road. The scene was no longer hidden in the dark. It was being witnessed. The narrow stretch of highway had turned into an unspoken stage, where power and prejudice were revealing themselves in silence. The officer, sensing eyes on him, shifted his stance, his confidence hardening instead of softening. The tension sharpened. It was no longer about the traffic stop. It was about control. Inside the vehicle, her husband felt the line crossing from uncomfortable to dangerous, from unprofessional to reckless. He had seen situations escalate over far less. He had signed reports where the blame was passed around like a shadow, where names were protected, rewritten, buried. He had watched careers disappear and reputations quietly repaired behind closed doors. But this time, he wasn't sitting behind a desk. This time. He was sitting in the passenger seat, watching his wife be reduced to a stereotype. In the eyes of a man who believed his uniform made him untouchable. And the realization struck him with a clarity he had never felt before. Policies meant nothing without accountability. Training meant nothing without humanity. Authority meant nothing without integrity. The officer leaned slightly closer to the window now, his expression harder, more confident. The power imbalance, the silence, the isolation of the road, it had created an illusion of control for him. He believed this was just another stop, another obedient driver, another forgettable night. He had no idea that the moment he had chosen to exercise his worst instincts would soon become the very moment that rewrote his entire future. And with every second that ticked by, he moved one step closer to a truth that would be impossible to escape. The sky above seemed to press down on them, thick and unmoving, as if even the night itself was holding its breath. The flashing lights, once sharp and aggressive, now felt almost distant, blurred at the edges of perception. Alia's world had narrowed to the small space of the driver's seat, the steady rhythm of her own breathing and the silent presence beside her. The officer stood there, convinced that the moment belonged to him. In his mind, he controlled the pace, the outcome, the fear. He believed he had chosen the wrong person on the wrong night and that the power rested entirely in his hands. He didn't consider the stillness inside the car. He didn't recognize the quiet calculation happening just inches away. He saw only what his bias allowed him to see: a woman alone, vulnerable, easy to command. But he was wrong. Inside the vehicle sat a man who had spent years studying behavior, patterns, abuse of power, and the way certain individuals hid behind a badge while betraying everything it stood for. He had disciplined officers for less. He had removed others for exactly this kind of behavior. He had lectured on ethics, on protocol, on the importance of restraint and respect. And now, he was witnessing the very problem he had fought against, unfolding in real time against the person he loved most. The contrast was unbearable. The weight of the moment shifted. A subtle change in posture. A quiet movement. A presence no longer hidden or passive. Authority, real authority, filled the space without a single spoken word. The power in the situation inverted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a heavy certainty that settled over the road like an approaching storm. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the officer's face. He looked again, more carefully, as if suddenly aware that the car held more than he had initially assumed, that the silence he had taken for obedience might, in fact, be judgment, that the eyes observing him were not frightened ones, but measured, professional, and deeply disappointed ones. And then the realization hit, not in a flash, but in a slow, sinking wave of dread. Everything he had done, every calculated glance, every unnecessary step, every unspoken accusation, it had all been witnessed, not by a helpless stranger, but by the very person capable of deciding what happened next. The illusion of control shattered. In its place, fear, the same fear he had expected her to feel. Only now, it belonged to him. On that quiet road, under those flashing lights, the roles had reversed. The man who believed he ruled the moment now stood exposed inside it. And the truth he had tried so desperately to ignore was no longer avoidable, because sitting right there, only a few feet away, was not just a witness. It was the police chief, and he had seen everything. The road returned to its silence, but nothing about it felt the same. What had just unfolded in that narrow stretch of pavement would never be written off as a misunderstanding or brushed away as a routine stop. It lingered, heavy with consequence, etched into memory with painful clarity. For Alia, the moment settled deep in her chest, not as a victory, but as a reminder of how easily her safety had been placed at risk, not because of something she did, but because of who she was. Her hands, once tense on the steering wheel, slowly relaxed. The air in the car, which had felt tight and unreachable only moments before, softened. Yet the calm that followed was not relief. It was awareness. Awareness of a truth that millions carried in their daily lives, that even the most ordinary moments could become dangerous, simply by existing within the wrong gaze. Beside her, her husband sat in quiet reflection. He had dedicated his life to rebuilding trust in a system that so often faltered. He had believed in policies, reforms, training sessions, disciplinary actions. But witnessing it from this side had changed him. The issue was deeper than procedures. It lived in attitudes, assumptions, silence, protection, and patterns repeated too often to count. This was no longer just his job. It was personal. And it was bigger than one officer. What happened that night would travel through the department in unseen waves. It would settle into files, reports, conversations, and reform. It would force eyes open, force hands to rewrite procedures that had failed too many times before. Not through revenge, but through accountability. Not through anger, but through undeniable truth. A truth witnessed. a truth recorded in conscience. For Alia, the road home carried a new weight, but it also carried a deeper strength, a strength shaped by dignity, restraint, and the quiet power of knowing she had never once lowered herself to meet hatred where it stood. She had remained still. She had remained human. And in that simple, courageous act, she had exposed the flaw in a system that too often refused to look at itself. This wasn't just the story of a traffic stop. It was the story of how power can be challenged without force, how injustice can be revealed without violence, how silence, in the right moment, can be louder than any argument. And the question it leaves behind is this: how many moments like this must happen before dignity is no longer the exception, but the rule?